Hello everyone, this is Air, and welcome to the 40th episode of Death Row Executions. Today's story is on William Zuern Jr., who was sentenced to death in the state of Ohio. Before I begin, I would like to thank everyone because we are at 25,000 subscribers, and also a shout out to Neva Kelly and Crazy Cat Lady. Thank you too for becoming patrons on my Patreon. William Zuern Jr. was born on December 5th, 1958 in Cincinnati, Ohio. His parents were married, but the environment William grew up in was not the best for a young child. His father, William Sr., was a drug dealer who frequently had buyers coming into his home to purchase narcotics. William did not listen to his parents, lost respect for them, and began to run the streets. He would also frequently miss school without any repercussions from his parents. On October 19, 1972, at the age of 13, William was arrested for the first time for malicious destruction of property for slashing tires on 4 separate vehicles. He was put on probation and did not have to spend any time in a juvenile detention center. The following year, in 1973, William's parents divorced and he stayed to live with his dad while his mother moved to Dayton, Ohio. That same year, while still on probation, he was arrested for burglary. He broke into a community development building and stole equipment. He was ordered to go back with his father and was put on house arrest and ordered to pay fines for violating his probation. Something happened to where his father did not pick William up, so he was being temporarily housed at the Woodman Farms for a couple of months to see if another family member would take him in. It was only a couple of months after his burglary charge, and he was caught selling weed and a syringe at the Woodman Farms, which put him in violation of his court order. He was still ordered to live with his dad, had to pay more fines, and stayed on house arrest. He had strict orders to behave and stay in school, but after checking up on him a few months later, he was ordered to be placed at the Ohio Youth Commission for yet again violating his court order. He continued to disobey his parents and had missed 43 out of 51 scheduled school days. His case was terminated on March 7, 1975, and he was no longer on parole. He was under orders to live and stay with his mother in Dayton, Ohio, but on September 11th that same year, he was put on probation for petty theft. This time, he stole money from a newspaper rack but only got away with $2. He was treated at the Central Community Health Board and was released at the age of 17 in the beginning of January 1976. That same month and year, he was arrested again for attempted robbery. He hit a man by the name of Stanley Rogers on the head with a flashlight and stole his wallet that contained no money. He was sent back to the Ohio Youth Commission, but this time was placed in maximum security. It has not been disclosed what his sentence was, but he was eventually released. It was March 6, 1978, and 19-year-old William was now living on his own at 2151 Hatmaker Avenue. On this particular day, he invited some friends over, Greg Kidd and 15-year-old James Driscoll. They all smoked weed and got high when Greg offered William a knife for more weed. William got angry at the bad deal and started yelling and then brought up how his German Shepherd was a mean dog. Things got weird for Greg and James, so they started to leave the house, and William grabbed his gun from a separate room, came back, and shot James in the hip. This was the first time he was arrested as an adult, and he was sentenced to 1 to 5 years at the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility for felonious assault. While in prison, his father was still living a life as a drug dealer, but was busted in 1979 when a man by the name of Gregory Earls became an informant and led an undercover police officer to William Sr.'s house for a drug deal. For this, William Sr. was arrested and put on probation. Sometime later, Gregory Earls was arrested and sent to the Lebanon Correctional Facility, where William also happened to be before he was transferred. William was aware of the fact that Gregory was the one who got his dad busted, so he confronted him in prison and the two got into a yard fight. Eventually, Gregory was released from prison and William was also released from prison in 1983. The same month and year he was released, he was still up to no good and continued to socialize with the wrong crowd. On May 12, 1983, William went to a friend's house to hang out and brought a gun with him that he hid in the back of his pants. It was after midnight, and while in the front of the house, William noticed Gregory Earls getting out of his vehicle. They began to argue, and when Gregory walked closer to William grabbed his concealed weapon and fired at Gregory's chest. Noticing that Gregory was still standing, William fired a few more times until Gregory collapsed on the floor. Gregory was still alive, but when he was rushed to the nearest hospital, he was pronounced dead. William was indicted for aggravated murder and while awaiting trial was sent to the Community Correctional Institute in Hamilton County, Ohio. He was placed in a single cell that was housed in a part of the prison for people who have committed violent crimes. The 1869 Civil War era built prison was run down and had no plumbing in the cells. Because of this, prisoners used buckets as their toilets that had to be dumped out the following morning. Upset with his living conditions and not liking the treatment from guards, he confided in another inmate by the name of Wayne Lewis. William told Wayne that it was unfair he was not given the full 5 minutes of allotted phone time and that he was going to do something about it. For the next 3 days, William worked on making a homemade shank by breaking the handle off of his toilet bucket and sharpening it against the concrete in his cell. On May 13, 1984, William's trial concluded after pleading guilty of murdering Gregory, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Just a month later, on June 9, 1984, officers Joe Burton and Philip Pence were ordered to go search William's cell because Wayne had notified staff of his plans. It was almost 11 p.m. that night when they made it to William's cell and ordered him to the door. William was lying in bed completely naked but followed orders. Officer Philip then opened the cell door, and that is when William lunged at him with his homemade shank and stabbed Officer Philip in the chest, piercing his heart. After this attack, William became very calm and said that he sexually got off on what he just did. On October 15, 1984, the same year he committed his crime against Officer Pence, a jury found William guilty of aggravated murder against a peace officer and was sentenced to death by method of lethal injection. William was then transferred to the Ohio Correctional Facility in Hamilton County, Ohio, and on October 14, 1985, a year after his death sentence, William, fellow death row inmates John Bird, Jay Scott, and Eric Swafford kidnapped officers William Dunn and Randy Mahaffey. While holding the officers captive, the inmates were trying to negotiate what they wanted. The following morning, at almost 3 a.m., William and his crew let Officer William Dunn free in exchange for a radio. While waiting to hear back on the request to be on a local radio to express their frustration, they destroyed prison property and also sexually assaulted another inmate. Finally, at 3:46 a.m., the inmates agreed to let Officer Randy Mahaffey go when they were promised a chance to go on air. William went on trial again, and instead of pleading guilty of kidnapping, he pled guilty to a lesser charge of abduction and was sentenced to 2 to 10 years. William's initial execution date was set for October 5, 1992, but the Ohio U.S. District Judge by the name of Walter Rice postponed the date indefinitely, and he also requested a new trial, although the U.S. Supreme Court concluded his trial was fair and refused to hear any more appeals. On July 17, 2003, the U.S. Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati, Ohio, rejected Judge Walter Rice's ruling, and the U.S. set an execution date for the following year. Although William was represented by attorney Kathleen McGarry, she wrote a letter on May 21, 2004 to the Ohio Parole Board. She stated that she nor her client would partake in a clemency hearing because William did not want to be involved in the hearing or have anyone fighting for him to be taken off of death row. The Ohio Parole Board, on the other hand, received over 100 signatures requesting that they and Governor Bob Taft commute William's sentence of death. The clemency hearing was initiated by Governor Bob Taft on May 24, 2004, with no one in support of William in attendance. Two men by the names of Charles Willey and Tim Pritchett from the Ohio Attorney General's Capital Crime Unit were there, and also a Howard County prosecutor. They presented facts that William was a violent person from childhood, and even while in prison after his last sentence, he was still getting into a lot of trouble. A year after his abduction sentence, he stabbed an inmate with a shank and threw urine on a guard. He then harassed another officer by throwing soap bars at his head, and even threw feces on that officer's face. The clemency hearing was very short, and they concluded that there was no other inmate that was less deserving of clemency than him. The Ohio Parole Board voted 9-0 and recommended to the governor that William's clemency should be denied. William's execution date was on June 8, 2004, just weeks after his clemency was denied. For his final meal, he had chocolate milk, cherry cheesecake, mashed potatoes and gravy, corn, lasagna, macaroni and cheese, and garlic bread. While on death row for 20 years, not one of William's family members came to visit him until the day of his execution. William's two sisters wanted to come and see him, but he refused them. William was also given a Bible but had it removed from his cell, and also refused a spiritual advisor as well. When he was to be taken to his execution room, William stuck toilet paper in his ears and refused to talk to any prison staff. When he was asked if he had any last words, he replied by saying, "Nope." The 2 lethal drugs were given, and after 6 minutes, Warden James Haviland went on his mic and pronounced his time of death at 10:04 a.m. And now for a discussion and question time. It was interesting to read that no one in support of William came to his clemency hearing despite receiving 102 signatures to commute his sentence from supporters. William received his death sentence for committing murder while in prison for carrying out a separate murder charge. Do you think that the people who signed the petition thought about his behavior in prison and knew he was not a person who would stop killing, or do you think they did not care about his behavior in prison and only focused about not wanting him to be executed? Similar to Karla Faye Tucker, they both said that they were sexually aroused by killing, so in my opinion, something like that doesn't just change, but unlike Karla Faye, he knew he was not a changed man and did not want to go through with appealing his case. I also find it interesting that his sisters tried to visit him on the day of his execution, but not in the 20 years he was on death row. Why do you think that is? Do you think they wanted to make amends before he died, or that they did not agree with his actions and just wanted to be witnesses? Officer Pence's family had passed away, so no one from the victim's family was there to witness the execution, so it makes you think.